Hey Amarillo, I'm Jason Boyette, and you're listening to Hey Amarillo, the interview podcast featuring some of the most interesting people and stories of Amarillo, Texas. As part of this podcast partnership with Brick and Elm magazine, I want to give a podcast shout out to Park Central, Oceans Behavioral Hospital, Three Feather Photo Co., and Amarillo National Bank. The January-February issue of Brick and Elm features the amazing winners of our first ever Brickley Awards. I encourage you to read this online at brickandelm.com, or you could check out our new digital magazine e-reader, which is optimized for mobile. It's really cool. You can find a link to that at brickandelm.com. Today's guest is Lindsay London Baker. If you've been paying attention in Amarillo over the past year, you've probably encountered Lindsay, at least her name or her face. She's the founder of the Amarillo Reproductive Freedom Alliance, which is a nonprofit group that arose in response to the so-called Sanctuary City for the Unborn ordinance, which local residents voted against in November. And Lindsay will be the first to say that she was only one of the women who led that grassroots effort. And she's right. But Lindsay was one of the most prominent and eloquent voices that rose up last year. And she ended up being mentioned because of this in stories about Amarillo and that ordinance all across the country. She was in publications like The Nation, Ms. Magazine, The Guardian, Jezebel, USA Today, The New Yorker. She was everywhere. And so I wanted to hear from her about the past year and what it meant for her overall relationship with Amarillo. And I know the issue of abortion is one that probably divides my listeners, just like it divided the city. And this isn't necessarily an interview about abortion, but it's about activism and why Lindsay found herself in a position to work so hard to defend the city she loves and the people that call it home. Here's Lindsay London Baker. Lindsay London Baker, welcome to the Hey Amarillo podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am honored to have you. I'm glad to have you. We've talked about this for a while. I should probably disclose from the beginning that you and I are friends. I officiated your wedding. So we have a connection that's not just you're a guest on the other side of the microphone. Yes. But I do want to start with you the same way I start with all of my guests, and that's to ask how you ended up in Amarillo, in the Panhandle in the first place.
Sure. I was actually born and raised here in Amarillo. Graduated class of 2000 at Tascosa. Like many folks, left a few times, but always managed to boomerang back. So Amarillo is home.
Did you have a plan once you graduated? Were you intent on getting out of Amarillo or moving in a certain direction career-wise?
I think yes. I kind of found my way into subculture, and so that lended itself to thinking the grass was going to be greener. Mm-hmm. I also floated a bit. I didn't have a direct entry point to college right after high school, but you never know which way the river's going to bend. Mm-hmm. And so Amarillo, for better or worse, has been home.
Tell people what you mean when you say subculture.
From a young age, I was just very fascinated by subculture. Particularly punk rock culture. I was kind of a mashup between hippie and punk. My mom's a bit of a hippie. We were a home birth family, and so she instilled a lot of that kind of DIY ethos into me. And then that was the friends and the culture that I sought out, through my late teens and early 20s. But I credit that to a lot of who I am and what has informed both my career and my activism, because that subculture taught a lot of, like I said, DIY ethos, questioning authority, and knowing that community can help people more quickly and more effectively than the government can. Okay. And so that's where a lot of that came from.
A lot of people might be surprised to think of a thriving punk or hippie subculture, whatever you want to call it, probably both, in Amarillo. But I mean, given your timeline and when you graduated, I know that was definitely a thing.
Oh, absolutely. Amarillo has had a very thriving subculture for, since the 80s. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of clubs and just different collective households and things where there would be shows and art shows and for, kind of misfit kids that maybe didn't fit in at the church scene or the athletic scene, there wasn't really a home for us. And so that's where we often found one another, creatives, musicians, otherwise folks that may have felt misunderstood. That was a gathering place to find community.
Okay. Give me the broad strokes of what your life and career looked like after you left here, like those early years right out of high school.
Spent some time in Houston, did a semester of community college there, spent some time in Austin. That was the first time I did activism work. I did some canvassing to inform folks about the harms associated with the disposal of Dell computer products.
Okay.
And
That's very, very tight sort of activism, but I bet it was a big thing at the time, right?
it was.
I mean, that's where Dell was located. Was in
That's
Austin.
right. And then spent some time in Albuquerque, New Mexico as well. While I was trying to figure out what I wanted to be and do, for a time I thought I might be a midwife or an herbalist, but ultimately settled on becoming an RN. And so I went to Amarillo College and graduated with the class of 2009.
Okay. And there's a lot of directions you can take as an RN. Did you have a certain type of medical care or practice in mind, or what was the plan?
OBGYN was my first space that I wanted to be in, but then I received an offer from the public health department to come on as an STD and HIV nurse. So community health was actually where I started my career, and it was so integral for the duration of my career. During that time, I helped, work the STD and HIV clinic, where we saw folks to come in for any reason related to their sexual health. But it was very eye-opening, where I really saw the impact of abstinence-only sex education combined with purity culture, while not acknowledging that young people continue to be sexually active. And so
I'm going to read between the lines in that you saw a lot of people who ended up pregnant or with an STD who were coming out of that church world seemingly unprepared for the sex they thought they were not going to be having. Is that accurate?
Absolutely accurate. And also with, no direct understanding of their own body. So I loved that job. I was there for 2 years and can't speak highly enough of our public health department and everything they offer.
What did you end up doing then after that public health stint?
Also during that time, I did get an opportunity to serve on the board of Planned Parenthood as a fresh nurse when we were still had a Planned Parenthood here before it was dissolved. After the public health department, I transitioned into pediatric home health. I've pretty much always been a community healthcare nurse. For a period of time, I did work at Northwest Texas Hospital as med-surg. I tip my hat to all of the care workers in the hospital, but it's not my speed. I really thrive in a slower community setting where I have the time to connect with my patients and do a lot more education. So since then, I have primarily been in home health. I did live in Burlington, Vermont for a few years with my previous partner and co-parent.
A little bit different culture, environment than Amarillo.
About a 180. It could not have been more different. I went to basically the, progressive bastion. My son was actually in kindergarten with Bernie Sanders' grandson.
Interesting. Okay.
But I worked for the Children's Hospital there, and then I worked for something called VCCI, which was a chronic care initiative. We primarily worked with dual diagnoses patients, so those experiencing homelessness and substance abuse issues. That was another really eye-opening experience for me, just to how underserved communities have to try and navigate the world. And since coming back to Amarillo in 2019, I worked as a school nurse for a period of time. I worked for AISD during the pandemic, and then I am now in adult home health chronic care management.
Okay. So you've been in a lot of different healthcare settings.
That was a long-winded thing, but I've been in practice for 15 years.
Okay. Tell me what it was like to move away from Amarillo to Vermont and then come back. The differences notwithstanding, but was there a part of that journey that made you appreciate Amarillo in a fresh way? Sometimes leaving is the best way to think, oh, that was a nice thing that I don't have anymore. But sometimes it opens your eyes to other things that you may not have.
There were parts of it, my family is here. My long-standing friendships are here. My elders are here. So being able to come home and be in service to them again was really wonderful. But another side of it with my interest in reproductive health and women's rights and the rights of all marginalized communities, Texas can be a challenge. So after being in a progressive state where things are positioned as a given, and then coming back to Texas and seeing how we often have to fight for breadcrumbs was a challenge. But ultimately, this is home, and the best friends of my life and my family are here. So I was very grateful to return to that.
Before we talk about some of your more recent activism, I mean, you talked about your career, but I also know you had a lot of different interests that weren't just nursing related. And I wonder if you can talk to me a little bit about some of the past work you did within this community.
Yes. So one of the things I'm most proud of was an event called FEM, and that was held over the course of 5 summers between 2005 and 2009. And I did that in collaboration with my friend Megan McDaniel, and it was held at the old Nat Ballroom when it was still an event space. And over the course of 5 years, we hosted over 300 female artists, ranging in ages from 3 to 85.
Okay.
And each year we would pick a different recipient charity that focused on women's rights or women's support. And that was really where I kind of cut my teeth of how do you coordinate over 100 people to make an effective event and outreach. And this was also before social media, so we did it via flyers and phone calls and all the things. But it was a beautiful time and something I'm very proud of.
I think when people think about artists, I mean, obviously, Amarillo is a center for art. A lot of people that get thought of, might have been, related to Cadillac Ranch or Ant Farm or some things like that. But we do have a very strong history of female artists here. I mean, from Georgia O'Keeffe, in the early 1900s, all the way up through that. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that art side of it and the women who are creating here.
Sure. It was so incredible to see all of we had, wall art hanging on the walls, we had jewelry, we had sculpture, and then we had a full slate of performance artists. And that's something that's so important is art is an intrinsic part of political revolution and of standing up against things because art roots us back into joy and creativity, which are so pivotal to surviving really stressful times, and uplifting minority artistic voices is crucial to making sure that we're seeing the full picture through an artistic lens.
So you mentioned your interest in reproductive health and also personally, and your activism, which has been part of your life for a long time. So I think if most people know you locally or have heard your name, it's in relation to the last year with the Sanctuary Cities controversy, with a lot of decision-making, a lot of outside influence, a lot of discussion about abortion. And I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk me through how you ended up leading that fight. Understanding it wasn't you by yourself, that you
Certainly.
had a community of mostly other women who came together and were very effective in that campaign. But how did you end up getting involved in such a public way?
The way it unfolded is still a bit surreal, but ARFA was formed by 6 women, 6 incredible women who are some of my dearest friends. We knew each other either closely or loosely through artist communities, other community involvement. There was a previous organization here called Abortion Access Amarillo that was led by an elder that we had volunteered with in different capacities. She was ready to pass the torch. And shortly after that time was when we found out that the Sanctuary Cities initiative had come back into Amarillo. It started with attending a presentation at a local megachurch, and we kind of debriefed at a coffee house after that.
Okay, so all of you went to the church for that presentation about it.
Correct. A few protested outside and a couple of us went inside so we could see what the presentation was about. And what we learned really shocked us. Texas, after the fall of Roe, the trigger law went into effect, and Texas has some of the most restrictive and harshest abortion laws in the country. And so what this ordinance sought to do was penalize someone who traveled out of state for legal services. And so we decided we had to do something. And we began meeting on a regular basis and slowly began to learn each other's skill sets. And we just had a beautiful alchemy that was able to carry us not only through basic community education and advocacy, but then into a full-blown campaign, at the end of which we were successful.
I want to add some context to the Sanctuary Cities Ordinance, because my understanding was that the folks behind it had tried to do it earlier. It was like there's no interest on the municipal side. There's no support for it. Other cities then ended up passing stuff like Lubbock, and so they came back to Amarillo. And I wonder if you can tell me why it came back after it had been turned down, I guess, earlier.
Yes, that's correct. They originally came in 2021, but did not gain traction with leadership at that time. The person at the helm of the Sanctuaries movement stated that because we had a leadership change, he did feel that it was appropriate to try again. And so also with the fall of Roe, there I think was a lot more of a push for these types of ordinances that limit travel for people that do hold a really strong anti-abortion sentiment to try and put tighter constraints on folks being able to access abortion.
Do you think the folks wanting to push this through in Amarillo thought that this would be a community that just rubber stamped it as quickly as some of the others in Texas? Do you think the pushback that emerged was surprising to them?
Absolutely. Yes, I think, they saw an all-male conservative to their own testimony pro-life city council. I think that they considered that it would likely, like you said, be rubber stamped through. But because we were able to get in very early with the help of other statewide activists who had faced Mark Lee Dixon, who is the leader of Sanctuary Cities, they had faced his tactics in their own cities. They were able to give us guidance on how to get ahead of it. And I have to give recognition to our city council in that they were very willing to meet with us from the very beginning. That's a testament to Amarillo. In larger cities, there's no way you could request a meeting with mayor and city council and have it all happen in a short period of time. So we were able to come in and build a real professional decorum with them to share our concerns. And rather than push it through, they took their time, they listened to their constituents and didn't rush to a decision.
Okay. It was a dramatic few months. There were a lot of really long council meetings.
Yes.
There were a lot of people against it and for it that maybe found themselves in a camp they didn't think they were going to end up in. I know that when the ordinance didn't pass, it was because of the votes of many people who probably prior to that would have considered themselves pro-life, which shows, I think, the diversity of thought and the pragmatism of local people, that the alignment around the issue might have been surprising to a lot of people. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that. Because of your background, because of your personal beliefs, you're very much on the pro-choice side, but you are working with people who probably consider themselves pro-life, and just had some other problems with the ordinance, even separated from the abortion issue. And I wonder if you could talk about the complexity of what that was like.
Yes, absolutely. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me and for all of us to see that people from all walks of life, regardless of background or belief, are rooted in those tenets of privacy and freedom. And so while a person may not choose an abortion for themselves, they did not agree with penalizing travel, which is enshrined in the Constitution, the right to interstate travel. The ordinance held a private right of action, maybe some might call a snitch law, where we're peering into our neighbors' deeply personal decisions to then try and take them to court on it. And so once we were able to get below that really inflammatory surface topic.
Right, which is the abortion part of it.
Exactly. To get into personal liberty, privacy, freedom, that's how we were able to build a lot of bridges and get people to see more clearly what was at stake with the ordinance.
Do you think those bridges were they in service of this one moment in Amarillo, or do you think they are bridges that you can build on, thinking of this community in a time that there's still a lot of fractures. There's still a lot of division in terms of how people vote, in terms of beliefs, in terms of religion and politics and all those things. But like this was a very unified sort of campaign that brought a lot of different people together. And that's part of it that felt really hopeful to me. And I wonder how you feel about that.
I do feel hopeful. This is clearly a very tempestuous time in our country. But if we want to hone in on abortion specifically, it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's something that can touch anyone's life. We don't have stats for the Panhandle, but within the state of Texas, 1 in 4 people who are able to become pregnant will choose an abortion in their lifetime. And over half of those are already parents. And so they know what it means to care and raise a child and still know that that's the right decision for their family. And so I think it's like many things, you have a fixed mindset about it until it comes to your door. And so I do hope that we will continue to be able to dissolve some of those preconceived notions about one another and stay rooted in community support and compassion.
I appreciated that this issue exposed a lot of the complexities of abortion as an issue. A lot of people just think it's like, okay, it's pro-choice versus pro-life. Roe versus Wade has been overturned. Dobbs' decision, all right, we won. But like the reality is that people in Texas are still getting abortions. They're just getting them elsewhere. And so they may have dropped here, but they've risen in New Mexico.
Right.
They haven't dropped nationally. In fact, the numbers have gone up slightly. It's just occurring in different places. And so it's not a problem that has been solved. In fact, it's gotten a little bit more complicated because of the division of the states.
Yes, and abortion has always existed and will always exist. There's a really fascinating project that came out of the University of Michigan called 4,000 Years for Choice. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the artist's name, but she profiled how women have assisted one another in abortion since the times of the Egyptians. And so women and pregnant people, if they are in a position where a pregnancy is not what's best for their future, they will find the way to access that care, whether safely or unsafely. And it's also so important to note that when we talk about abortion, we're not just talking about elective, we're also talking about medically necessary.
Okay.
And as we saw with many of the high-profile cases in our state of women that truly wanted these pregnancies, had complications, needed abortion care, and were then denied or delayed and potentially put to the brink of death, having to flee their own home state to be able to receive care. And so I think through a lot of those cases, it opened people's minds and hearts. They may have had someone a loved one that had a miscarriage in the past that needed a D&C. And if they were to arrive at a Texas hospital today, they may be turned away.
Right.
So that is a tremendously complex component of it that always has to be considered.
Well, and that was a lot of the weight that ended up on your side in the campaign against the proposition was coming from Amarillo's medical community.
Yes. Yes, we were very grateful for the support of Potter Randall County Medical Society, though that ended up having its own complex issues, which I'm not at liberty to speak on. As a care provider myself, our duty is to advocate for our patient and uphold their personal sovereignty, and that may include abortion care, and that's okay.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your decision to get as involved as you got, because it wasn't just you taking a leadership role in Amarillo, but you got attention far outside Amarillo. You were doing national media. There are photos of you, showing up on newspapers all over the United States. Did you go into it aware that might happen, or prepared for that, or did that feel like, oh, okay, this is where we are?
I was not. Kind of stumbled into that role. I credit being a nurse And before I was a nurse, I was a bartender.
Okay.
Right. So that's how I made my way through nursing school. So a lot of experience having uncomfortable conversations in just about any situation and having to fly by the seat of my pants.
Okay.
It wasn't something that I expected, and I was so deeply grateful to the trust of my team. And that was true at the beginning, but as time unfolded, we wanted to make sure that each member of our team took media opportunities as they felt comfortable and able, because we are a very diverse team, and we were fielding media requests not only locally, but nationally and internationally. So it was pretty wild, but I credit, I kind of go back to being a nurse and having that care-centered approach.
When you were having those conversations with people in the media, was there an element where they maybe felt surprised that Amarillo had become the center of this kind of fight? Like, did you find yourself wanting to defend this area or explain it to them that we are not, it's not the monolith that maybe our perception is?
Yes, and it's surprising that most people think Amarillo is a small town. And so we'd have to remind them we're almost 250,000 people. But we also are the home of Judge Matthew Kaczmarek, a federal judge that has presided over some very significant reproductive rights cases, most recently the mifepristone case.
Right.
And so Amarillo has become a unexpected hub for some of these critical repro fights. And that was something that we weren't expecting, and I think is part of what catalyzed a lot of the interest in our community. We found collaboration and solidarity from people from all walks of life, be that race, gender, economic status, political or religious background. And that's what we hope to continue to do with our work in ARFA, is be inclusive and intersectional, because at the end of the day, we are all impacted by legislation and decisions that try and, strip away what we believe to be fundamental human rights. So that's what we hope to continue to do.
The campaign took over a lot of 2024 here in Amarillo, which was tumultuous locally. It was tumultuous nationally. And, 2025, we've entered into another period of a lot of uncertainty. But the activism continues. For you and for your peers. I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about that, how you're thinking about this year or the next 4 years, and maybe how other people might find their way into activism. Because this was not something you planned. You just were equipped to step forward. And there's going to be other situations that come up, other things that people are passionate about.
Yes.
How do they do the same thing that you did?
When I think, when I try and talk to folks about how to get into organizing, is there's no wrong way to do it. Then there's 3 questions to ask yourself. What is needed? What am I good at? And what most deeply touches my heart? Because when you care about so many things, you can be pulled in a million different directions. And that's a real easy path towards burnout. So I would say, sit with those questions and find where you can best show up. Find the organizations that are already doing the work, connect with them. And if it's not somebody who's already doing the work, meet with like-minded folks. That's exactly what we did with ARFA. We met on a regular basis. And the more we got to know each other, the more we figured out whose each person's skill set was, so we could be effective. I kind of like to think of it as when you see birds migrating in the sky, there's the formation, there's the bird at the lead, but when that bird gets tired, they can go to the back.
Yeah.
And that's how I think of organizing as well, because compassion fatigue is real and burnout is real. And when you are working with a group of people, even when you need to step away, because we all do, because rest is revolutionary as well, that there's going to be a group of folks to continue the momentum. There's so many ways to show up, and they're all important. We can write and call to our legislators. We can also get to know our neighbors, find out how they need support. We can provide childcare. It doesn't just have to be being at the front of a protest with a bullhorn. Every action matters. So I want for anyone who feels compelled, to take action on an issue, that we need you and we welcome you.
You are in a position that sets you at odds with your personal beliefs, with probably the majority of people who live in Amarillo, stipulating that it's a lot more diverse than people think. But you talked about the difference between Vermont and the Texas Panhandle, just in terms of the culture. And there are a lot of people that will feel those differences, will say, I'm not like all my neighbors, and that's a reason for them to leave. There are other people who will stay and fight or try to change the culture just in the slightest bit. And I think that probably describes you. I want to know why. Why have you planted yourself here? Why have you continued to do the work when the work might be easier or more comfortable in another place?
That's a great question. Amarillo is home, and we, quote unquote, have just as much of a right to be here as anyone. And like I said before, trying to strip away conservative, liberal, whatever labels we may try and use, that we want to live safe, supported lives where we can be in service to our community. And also, Amarillo is a great place to be able to make change. We're small enough and accessible enough that you want to start an organization, you want to start a business, you want to throw an event, you want to get involved in politics, the on-ramps are accessible. And that can't be said for larger cities where there's so many more people and so many more challenges. So yes, bloom where you're planted, right? And stand up for your rights, because if we don't, who will?
This episode of Hey Amarillo is supported by Amarillo Habitat for Humanity, which works with families across the city to provide an alternative path to home ownership. This includes financial stability courses, volunteer construction, sweat equity from the families, reasonable down payments, and no interest loans. A Habitat house is not a free giveaway. But strong and stable homes help build strong and stable communities. And there are a lot of great nonprofits in Amarillo, but Habitat is the only one that focuses on affordable home ownership. It helps people help themselves, and that's why I love it. That's why I think this is such a great organization. So thanks to Amarillo Habitat for Humanity for sponsoring the podcast. Learn more at amarillohabitat.org. Okay, I'm back with Lindsay London Baker. Lindsay, this is part of the show I call 8 Straight. 8 Straight is sponsored every week by Panhandle Plains Historical Museum in Canyon. It's the largest history museum in Texas, and its collection includes the 2-room log cabin headquarters of the historic T Anchor Ranch, which was moved piece by piece to its location at the museum in 1975, which I was just a tiny kid at that point. I would have liked to have seen that. Like they were actually building a log cabin, a real life Lincoln Logs sort of scenario there. So you can see that building at Panhandle Plains, and you can learn more at panhandleplains.org. Okay, when you think of Amarillo 10 years from now, what do you hope for?
A more walkable and bikeable city, a fully revitalized and vibrant downtown. Mm-hmm. And my hope for Amarillo is my same hope for the rest of the country, that we can move away from the division between left, right, blue, red, and just unify, honestly, to not get too political, as the working class against those at the top with consolidated wealth who are trying to harm us. Yeah.
We may be going into a period where those with the consolidated wealth have a lot of power, and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
It will.
Okay, other than wind, what does this area have too much of?
Vacant commercial buildings that could be used as community support spaces or more local businesses or art spaces, any of that in the downtown area.
I feel like that's a reason a lot of companies come to Amarillo, is because we have a lot of space and we have a lot of buildings that are not being used. But it also requires like an imagination to repurpose a building like that. So I agree. I would love to see that.
Yes.
What does this area not have enough of?
I'd say specialty healthcare services. Many people have to travel out of town to receive specialized healthcare, which is a barrier for a lot of. So that would be my first.
Are there some particular specialties in mind that you think of?
Liver, hepatology, nephrology, some of the more complex pediatric things. Our teams here are incredible, but it's hard to recruit and retain in this region. And so my hope is that will grow over time.
Okay.
And then more green spaces and parks.
Yes.
Yes.
I think everybody wants that. The green part of the green space, that's the big challenge. We can set aside the land, but how do you keep it from not being yellow all the time? What's your favorite local neighborhood?
I love the Sunset Terrace area. All those homes are so old and unique. And then San Jacinto is my favorite for its history, its vibrancy, its diversity. Most of my favorite places are along 6th Street.
Okay.
San Jack as well as North Heights are strategically undervalued communities. And my hope is that our city leadership will keep its promises to prioritize and rehabilitate those parts of our city.
The long-term plans are in place.
Yes.
They're getting a lot of attention after years of inattention.
Yes.
So it's hopeful to see as long as that continues.
And the communities there are doing so much. And, at the end of the day, it's community care that makes it work.
Okay, what's your favorite local restaurant?
That one is so hard because I eat based on my mood. So I have a few. Yellow City Street Food, Cafe Girasol, Braceros on 6th. And then I always get Soulmate Korean food anytime I see that food truck out. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, tell me what kinds of moods lead into those types of food cravings.
It would be hard to pinpoint it, but yeah, I'm the kind of person I don't ever have a top favorite. You always got to give me a top 5.
Right. Okay. What's your favorite local nonprofit?
Well, aside from ARFA.
Yeah, let's say aside from ARFA.
No, I'm just teasing. I love the Leaders Readers Network. I think they're incredible. They do such great work. The kind of literature that they provide is inclusive and diverse, which is so important as we're facing a lot of attacks on libraries and those kinds of things.
A lot of former podcast guests are associated with that organization or its board. So I do have a lot of appreciation for them.
And also PFLAG and ATAG, which do incredible work to support our LGBTQ plus communities.
Okay. What's the most underrated aspect of living here?
I think it's what I mentioned earlier is the on-ramps to be able to make things happen, that we're small enough that if you have a dream, there are so many wonderful people there to support you and you can make it happen.
That is one thing. It's that Goldilocks just right sort of size that there are enough people to support a business, but not so many people that you can't be the first one to introduce something.
Right. And
this is not being done here, so I can do that.
And certainly a business is going to be trickier, but when it comes to community-centered work, event spaces, organizations, those kinds of things are much more accessible here than what I've experienced in larger cities.
Okay. Last question. When was the last time you visited Paladura Canyon?
Oh, in the fall. The Sunflower Trail is my favorite because there's almost always a little bit of water and all the trees.
Okay. That's a good trail, a good recommendation. I like to close by asking my guests to endorse something. So what's one thing you would like listeners to know about or to experience?
Since we are in peak winter, I really want to amplify the work of the Cold Blue Warming Station. This is a no-barrier shelter that is open to all, activates on our coldest nights when the wind chill is in the teens, and they do so much with so little. They have a text line where you can notify their team if there's an unhoused person needing support, and they will go to them to offer them a ride and shelter. I saw on their Facebook that last week they had a night with 125 people and over 30 pets.
Wow.
So the need is tremendous. So I would encourage everyone to check them out and see how you can get involved.
Okay, that's a great recommendation. Lindsay London Baker, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
And that concludes the episode. I want to say thanks to Lindsay for the interview. You can learn more about ARFA, Amarillo Reproductive Freedom Alliance, at amarillorfa.org. Thanks to Amarillo Habitat for Humanity and Panhandle Plains Historical Museum for supporting this podcast, and to Angelina Marie for editing every week. And thank you for listening. I really do appreciate it. Hey Amarillo exists on a weekly basis because of listeners like you and the local people who support it financially through patreon.com/HeyAmarillo. Hey Amarillo's executive producers include Josh Wood, Patrick Burns, Wes Reeves, Jason Burr, Katie Linger, Corey Burns, Barbara and Jim Witten, and Cindy Graham. This has been episode 390. My name is Jason Boyette, and I'll see you next week.